Hey guys, welcome back. It's Missy, and today we're going to be talking about healthy arguing. Now, if you grow up in an unhealthy environment, parents that fought a lot, you had narcissistic parents, you had abusive parents, you had addict parents, whatever it is, you had parents that had mental health issues, you never really learned how to healthily argue. And in every relationship, there's always going to be some sort of arguing. So in your relationships, in your adult relationships, in your romantic relationships, there's going to be times when you disagree. There's going to be times when you guys are arguing. There's going to be times when you're nitpicking, and there's going to be moments when you guys aren't really getting along, or you guys are kind of going at it, or you guys are irritated with each other. So you want to learn how to deal with these situations. So oftentimes when you grow up in an unhealthy environment, you don't learn how to deal with these situations. So you'll go to what you've learned, or unhealthy coping mechanisms like running away, maybe raising your voice, maybe, getting aggressive, whatever it is. You may not argue in a healthy way. You may say really awful things and then regret it. You don't learn how to be able to communicate, and you don't learn how to resolve conflict, which that's what we'll talk about today. I also have a video about how to avoid communication breakdown, which I will leave right here. Fast forward the intro. It's cringy. I was first starting out on YouTube and learning how to start doing videos, so fast forward that. But the other content I've talked more about listening, and I talk more about how to avoid that communication breakdown. So I definitely recommend looking into that. This video, we're going to talk more about the arguing aspect. To start it off, let's talk about some issues you'll run into when arguing with your partner and why you feel like you can't resolve issues. And one of the first things is you will focus on the semantics and the complaints rather than the solutions. So we'll first start off, one person will complain, and then it gets into, they're continuing that complaint. And then the other person will also chime in and say, well, you do this, and they'll start complaining. And you guys focus on the complaints, then you also maybe focus on the semantics, like arguing about what a word means, because I've been guilty of that. I do that in some of my arguments with my partner. So you'll get stuck in the semantics rather than focusing on some sort of solution. So then what happens when you get stuck on the semantics, or you get focused on the complaints, both of your egos will come up, and then you'll start acting off of that ego, taking low blows, saying mean things to each other. And you both will start to be really hurtful and spiteful towards each other. And also what could happen is you will latch onto one word that they say, and then you'll make a whole defense off of that one word that they said, rather than taking the time to think, okay, this is the end goal. This is what we're striving towards. You get stuck on all of the negativity, and you get very much trapped in your emotions. And then when you are hurt, you'll look for ways to make your ego feel better. And oftentimes that's when we go to taking digs and hurting the other person. Another thing you may run into is one person may shut down. And this especially happens if you or your partner has more avoidant attachment. So oftentimes you'll notice that when shit hits the fan, when emotions rise, one of you will want to dip out. You'll want to avoid the conversation. It will get too uncomfortable. Also, one of you may shut down if you have been in very volatile, toxic upbringings where there was a lot of arguing. One of you may go into a freeze response or a fawn response, where you just want the argument to end. You want to please the other person. You just want it to stop, and you're not really coming to any sort of solution. And then one of you will shut down, and it's oftentimes because one of you maybe feels helpless, feels like there's no point having this disagreement, feeling like it's not going anywhere. Maybe you'll feel like nothing you say matters. And I see this happen a lot with my feelers versus my more logical people. Oftentimes, if you are a feeler and you have more of a logical partner, your logical partner will need to be convinced of things. And as a feeler, that can be hard because you just want to be validated in your feelings. And logical people more so think with reasoning and logic. So you guys can butt heads in that way, and more of the feelers will shut down, and they will have a hard time explaining how they're feeling. Or they may see no point in having a disagreement because they're tired of trying to convince their logical partner how they feel or what they feel is right. Or one of you may shut down from trauma, from dealing with a lot of arguments in your family, maybe in your upbringing, maybe the way that you dealt with that trauma is that you now are fearful of getting into disagreement, so you try to leave the situation. Maybe you feel very shameful about maybe something you did, so you want to leave that situation, you want to isolate, you want to withdraw. Maybe when voices are raised or you're being told you did something wrong, you will have fears of being abandoned, or you may fear that the situation will escalate. Even though it maybe hasn't escalated in the past, there's still that trauma in your childhood where things have escalated. You see how bad things could be from raised voices or anger, that you fear that happening in your dynamics now. Or another way you may shut down is you'll shut down from having conversations, but you actually will get into that fight mode where you will start to take those low blows, those digs. You're coming from a very hurt place because you're trying to protect yourself. Another problem you may run into is thinking of what you want to say rather than listening. So this is where we'll get into the territory of speaking over each other and validating each other, because you're thinking about what you want to say and getting your point across, and you're not focused on your partner and them being heard, and also them having new needs and coming to some sort of solution. And this is where there can be a mix-up of words where you misunderstand what your partner is saying because you're so focused on getting out your words rather than actually hearing what they're saying. Another issue you will run into is black and white thinking, or black and white phrases like always and never. If you tell your partner you always mess up or you never help me out, that will immediately put them on the defense because they're thinking about how just yesterday they were trying to help you out and you're saying they never do. So it'll put them in this place where they feel like no matter what they do, it's never right and they can never satisfy you. And they're like, no, but I did this. I already did this thing. Like, why aren't you acknowledging this thing? So saying always and never, phrases like that will definitely create controversy and create a problem, because always and never, that's unrealistic. It's not that they always do something or they never do something. People aren't so concrete and rigid like that. And it's better to mention, you often do this, or sometimes you do this, using more of those gray area words, so that way they realize like, okay, this is something I do maybe often, but it's not all the time. Another thing is walking away from the problem or walking away from the disagreement and not coming back to it or not having a conversation about it. So there are times when maybe you have this ongoing conflict that never gets really resolved, because when things get heated, you guys just go your separate ways, and then maybe you come back and you act like nothing happened, or you maybe apologize, but you don't come to some sort of resolution. And so then it's just a continuing fight again and again, rather than maybe you guys take some time apart and then come together and continue to talk about the issue and then resolving it. Another problem you may run into is making one of you responsible for the other person's feelings. So when you make someone responsible for your feelings, like you made me mad, you made me upset, you made me sad, then you're gonna expect that person to fix it and make it better. When in reality, we're responsible for our own feelings. So you'll be waiting for them to change your mood when that's something that you have to change on your own. Even though maybe someone does something that causes a reaction and a emotional response with you, that's solely your responsibility, where you have to take care of that. And oftentimes people are like, well, they did this thing, so they're responsible to make it better. And although maybe they made you upset and they need to apologize and own up to it, that's their part, but they cannot make you happy again, or they cannot change your emotion. They're not God. They don't have that effect on you. You have to be the one that is open to changing your mood based on maybe the way they take responsibility for whatever they did, or based on you deciding that you want to make the situation better and you be more open to them. So those are some problems that you'll run into. Now, how do you resolve some of these issues? How do you argue in a more healthy way? One thing I would say is pick and choose your battles, and for more of like the nitpicky fights and the, they're not really that deep, make lighthearted jokes. That is part of the golden ratio, is what keeps people together. It depends on how often they have contentment and they're angry versus how much they have laughter and fun times together. So one way to counteract those little disagreements is to just make it into a joke, you know, be lighthearted. That way it doesn't turn into something more or it just builds up over time. Another thing to do, which this is talked about often, is use I statements in your disagreements. And what's really important, people will get stuck on saying, I'm mad that you did this, or I'm mad that you made me feel this. So they'll still use those you statements rather than correctly saying like, I'm upset because I feel abandoned when you left. You know, instead of saying I feel and then taking a dig at them, you want to talk about how you genuinely felt, being vulnerable and saying like, I feel this because of this situation. Also, another thing that could be really helpful is when you start to get upset, repeat back what you think the other person said. So if you're listening and you hear them saying something that triggers you, repeat back like what I heard you say was, and you may be getting triggered because you're getting stuck on a word and you're not really listening. They'll be able to correct you and say, hey, no, that's not really what I said. This is what I meant. And so that way it will de-escalate any extreme fights or from you guys derailing the actual issue. Another thing is de-escalating the situation. So oftentimes, not all the time, but if you get in very heated arguments, there'll usually be someone that's like at an 8 and maybe another person's at like a 6 or a 7. One of you in this situation, it would be best if one of you tries to de-escalate that situation. So rather than joining each other at the same level of heated energy or in the same level of anger, try to take a step back. If you see you're one of the people that is a little bit more calm, and try to calm your partner down and not keep triggering them and getting a reaction out of them. Try to calm yourself down and try to calm them down and say, okay, we'll talk about this in a minute. One of you has to be that leader. Otherwise, you both are going to go on the same level. You're going to take those low blows. You're both in your egos. Both your egos got wounded and both your egos took a hit. So one of you, it would be best if one of you tried to de-escalate the situation and not get into those emotions. And then once you do that, once you de-escalate the situation, then you can have a real conversation. Another thing, if things get really heated, you can always come back to the conversation. Don't just leave and never talk about it again or go into that silent treatment or pretend it never happened. Say, hey, listen, we're getting really upset. Let's take a few minutes to, you know, calm down, and then we'll come back to it. Studies have shown that couples that take some time to soothe themselves and calm down from the fight come back with more logical reasoning mindset, and they're able to talk out that issue. So sometimes you just need to take a break to re-regulate yourselves, which that goes into each person needs to learn how to emotionally regulate. That's really important. Oftentimes we see that men are expected to hold their emotions together, and women, you know, we're known as like more of the emotional ones, and we've always felt that we could just kind of go off of our emotions and we don't have to emotionally regulate, but that's not true. Each person needs to be responsible and emotionally regulate. When things get escalated, you need to know you're in control of your own emotions and your own person, and you need to be the one that doesn't react off of these emotions. You can have your emotions, you can feel however you want to feel, there's nothing wrong with that, but the way that you respond to these emotions and how you react to these emotions are something that you have to take care of. So what that would mean is when you notice yourself getting triggered or getting to a heightened place, take deep breaths to re-regulate yourself, maybe take a moment to calm down, to come back to the situation. You need to be the one that's responsible for your own emotions, and like I said, not expecting the other person to take care of your emotions. Which that kind of goes into the accountability aspect. So it's really important that each person holds themselves accountable for the wrongs they do in the disagreement or what the complaint is, whatever it is. You focus on the areas you're wrong in and take accountability of like, you know what, you're right. Sometimes I do nag too much. You know what, you're right. Sometimes I don't put my phone to the side and pay enough attention to you. Let's do something about that. Let's take care of that, rather than, you know, like I said, they say a complaint and then you say a complaint and you're just stuck on complaining about each other. Take accountability and own what you're doing wrong and validate your partner and how they feel. Another thing that could be helpful is knowing each other's triggers. Now with triggers, that doesn't mean that you completely have to avoid your partner's triggers or they have to avoid your triggers. It's not about that. It's about when you know certain things trigger your partner, maybe be more sensitive around those areas and talk them through it and say, listen, I know you're triggered right now, but this is something we have to talk through and we have to work through. I'm not gonna not trigger you, but I can help you maybe work through this trigger or do whatever it takes to make you feel comfortable, but this is something we have to deal with. And it's really important that you don't just stop talking because it's uncomfortable. You need to talk through things that are really uncomfortable. Things need to be addressed. You need to face things. That's really important in order to get to some sort of solution. If you don't bring up the things that make you uncomfortable or you don't address things, it's just going to be a continuous fight over and over again until it builds to a point where there's just resentment or the relationship goes sour. So you want to talk about these things that make you uncomfortable and are hard to face, and you want to do it together so that way it's something that you can resolve and come up with some sort of solution. Another thing that's really important is you want to make the place you're at, the space, a safe space where you feel like you will be heard, that you can open up to each other. So it's really important that you say, hey, it's okay, like I'm here for you, being very comforting and being very empathetic towards your partner, of saying like, I'm gonna hear you out, I'm here to resolve things with you, I'm here to make things work with you, making the choice that you choose each other and you want to make things work, and making a place where you guys feel like you're gonna work to some sort of resolution. It can make it a space where it's much easier to have those conversations, so that way you don't respond off of those unhealthy coping mechanisms, or if those unhealthy coping mechanisms or you do get triggered come up, you know that this is the place where it's safe and you can talk about these things. So this especially rings true like if one of you struggles with shutting down. If you notice your partner is starting to shut down, what you can do is say, hey, I noticed that you're starting to shut down, I'm here for you, it's okay, like let me know what I can do to make it more comfortable for you. We're not gonna not talk about this thing, but I want you to know I want to hear you out, I want to do whatever it takes, so that way we can resolve this situation. So that way you guys know that you're on the same team, rather than feeling like rather than your partner feeling like they're isolated, or that you're butting heads and nothing's really going anywhere. Another thing that could be helpful is in those times when maybe things get a little bit heated, to help enforce that empathy is to hold hands, or to have some intimacy in the relationship. And it doesn't just mean sex, but just sitting next to each other, giving each other a hug, to remind you guys that you love each other and you don't want to hurt each other. And touching each other stimulates a lot of those happy hormones, dopamine, oxytocin, so that way you guys will feel connected and want to make things work and want to have that conversation. Another thing that's really important is if one of you is apologizing to the other, you need to be at least open to that apology. It doesn't mean you have to accept it immediately, but you want to be open to hearing what they have to say, not trying to push them down or make them feel terrible, but just being like, okay, you know what, they're trying to make an effort, so I'm gonna try to make an effort. The least you could do is acknowledge that they're trying to make things better in some sort of way. And of course it depends on the severity of what they did. Obviously, if they did something terrible, like they cheated on you or they hid something major from you, then maybe you don't want to be open to having a conversation with them. That's fine. But there's other things, like maybe they said something that hurt your feelings, or maybe they made a mistake. At least be open to hearing them out, so that way you can come to some sort of solution. And the last thing is focusing on your end goal, the solution. So when you're arguing with your partner, you want to think, okay, what are some talking points that I want to address? What are some issues I want to address? And we can come up with some sort of solution. What are the things that we want to address, so that way we don't keep having this same fight? It's not to say that you're not going to fight, and sometimes these things It's not like these things are never going to come up, but they could come up less if you actually address the issues and you come to some sort of solution of what's going to work. And this is when negotiation comes into play, where you say, okay, listen, if you do this thing, I will do this thing. So you both feel like you're getting something that you want. Maybe it won't be to the full extent of what you want, but you're coming to some sort of middle ground where you're at least trying to work at it and come to some sort of solution. And it's, you know, you scratch their back, they'll scratch yours. So you got to start somewhere, or one of you has to be like, all right, listen, this is what I'm willing to give. What are you willing to give? And just coming to some sort of agreement. So what do you guys think? Leave it all in the comments below. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with someone that you think may need it. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye, guys. I'm so awkward. I need to literally put myself in a bubble. And then what? So then what happens when you get focused, don't like the pee-pee, get away from the pee-pee. Like epinephrine, not